He just wanted to buy a gift. She saw a threat. The police arrived in a minute, and the real shock came in 10. The jeweler's store, the 911 call, and the silence in the room when my mother, the head of the FBI, appeared. Jaden Harris stepped through the glass doors of Elegant Jewelers, a prestigious boutique tucked away in the heart of downtown. Inside the boutique, the atmosphere was one of refined elegance. Gentle music played in the background, and soft lighting accentuated the allure of diamonds and gold. Jaden moved slowly among the displays, his dark eyes scanning each piece with a mix of awe and careful consideration. Every delicate necklace, every glimmering earring, whispered stories of craftsmanship and beauty, a stark contrast to his humble beginnings. Yet, despite the grandeur that surrounded him, his focus was on one thing: finding a pendant that could encapsulate his love and gratitude for the woman who had nurtured him. He lingered near a display case showcasing an array of pendants varying in design and cut. His fingers trembled slightly as he gently tapped the glass, each tap echoing in his thoughtful mind. He recalled the countless evenings spent listening to his mother's stories about her youth, the sacrifices she made, and the rare moments of laughter that brightened their modest home. Today, he intended to add a glint of joy to her life, an heirloom in the making. Jaden's eyes were drawn to a particular pendant, a minimalist yet elegantly crafted medallion with subtle etchings that could easily accommodate a family crest, or perhaps simply serve as a timeless keepsake. He imagined the pendant resting against his mother's chest, a small yet significant symbol of her strength and kindness. Carefully, he approached the display, his heart pounding with both excitement and a quiet nervousness that always accompanied moments of personal triumph. As he examined the piece, his attention was momentarily divided by the ambient murmuring of the boutique's other patrons. He sensed, almost imperceptibly, a shift in the atmosphere, as if the very air had grown heavier with unspoken judgments. Though he couldn't pinpoint the source of that tension, a faint feeling of being scrutinized began to settle over him. In the back of his mind, he wondered if his presence in such a refined establishment was unusual. After all, he was just a teenager from a modest neighborhood, dressed in simple but neat clothes, who had worked hard to save his money and dared to dream of giving his mother the best. Undeterred by the internal tremors of anxiety, Jaden continued to study the pendant. He shifted his gaze from the delicate craftsmanship to the accompanying chain, trying to envision how they would harmonize with his mother's taste. He recalled the warmth of her smile and the gentle strength in her voice, and for a fleeting moment, the boutique transformed into a sanctuary of hope, a place where his modest savings could bloom into an expression of pure love. Unbeknownst to Jaden, a pair of discerning eyes had fallen upon him from across the room. A middle-aged white woman, a frequent visitor to the boutique, watched with a mixture of disdain and suspicion. Her gaze was calculated and sharp, the frowned lines on her face deepening as she observed Jaden's every movement. In her mind, she had already formed a judgment, a dark stereotype reinforced by years of biases she refused to question. Convinced that something was amiss merely because of his youthful appearance and the way he carefully inspected the items, she decided in that silent instant that this young man wasn't there with good intentions. Jaden, oblivious to the scrutiny, continued to deliberate over the merits of various chains and settings. He picked up a small brochure that detailed the craftsmanship behind each piece, his eyes lighting up as he read about the legacy of the jewelry house. Each word cemented his resolve that his mother deserved something timeless, something that would be as enduring as her unconditional support. He took a deep breath and reached out to take the pendant off the display, his fingers hovering over the cool glass as if drawing strength from the simple act of choice. At that moment, the bustle of the busy boutique slowed to a near standstill in Jaden's perception. The soft hum of conversation, the subtle clink of glassware, and even the ambient music, all seemed to merge into a singular moment of determination. Every inch of his being was focused on making the right choice, on ensuring that his savings would culminate in a moment of joy for his family. In his mind's eye, he envisioned holding the pendant with trembling hands as he presented it to his beloved mother, a gesture that was both humble and heroic. Yet, as he lingered there in quiet concentration, Fate was already weaving the threads of a story far larger than a simple gift purchase. The ordinary act of choosing jewelry was about to intersect with the extraordinary, a moment that would soon escalate into a confrontation that none could have predicted. In that innocent boutique, where beauty was crafted in precious metals and gemstones, a new chapter was being written, one that would challenge assumptions, expose prejudices, and ultimately reveal the true essence of power and dignity. Little did Jaden know that his silent determination, his courageous act of simple love, had inadvertently set the stage for an encounter that would unfold in the most unexpected and dramatic manner. And so, with his heart filled with hopeful anticipation, he gently placed the pendant in the palm of his hand, unaware that every decision, every step he took, would soon lead him into the midst of a storm that would shake the foundations of every preconceived notion, not least of all in the minds of those who were quick to judge. As Jaden continued to examine the delicate medallion with quiet determination, an unmistakable change in the boutique's atmosphere rippled through the room. From a secluded corner near the display cases, a white, middle-aged woman in impeccably tailored attire fixed her unyielding gaze on him. Her look was sharp and assessing, a gaze that pierced through the soft glow of the chandelier and the refined ambience of elegant jewelers. Known to frequent the boutique for years, she had long regarded this establishment as a sanctuary of exclusivity and tradition, where every customer fit a certain expected mold. Today, however, her eyes fell upon a young man who, by every measure in her mind, did not belong. Every movement, every cautious gesture Jaden made stirred an instinctive alarm in her. In her world, where smooth manners and polished appearances were the unspoken currency of respectability, she found his intent and the seriousness in his eyes deeply out of place. The thought quickly coalesced in her mind that this was not the work of an earnest, hard-working teenager striving to purchase a meaningful gift, but rather the doings of a suspicious youth bent on deceit. Fueled by years of prejudiced preconceptions, she believed that his presence was a sign of something nefarious, an intruder who might be in the act of preparing for a theft. Clad in a modest designer coat and with her perfectly arranged hair and minimalist jewelry, she exuded an air of confidence that came hand in hand with unwavering certainty. In her mind, she immediately categorized Jaden as a threat to the orderly world she cherished, a disruption to the norms of this refined community. As she watched him carefully browse the selection of pendants, it seemed to her that every measured movement was a calculated prelude to a criminal act. The notion that a young black teenager, alone in such an upscale environment, could simply be a loving son making a heartfelt purchase was, in her eyes, an implausible fantasy. Instead, she feared that he was playing a dangerous part in a petty scheme to steal from a place of wealth. Overwhelmed by a surge of self-righteous indignation and a burning urge to protect the sanctity of this familiar space, she reached slowly for her smartphone. With a furrowed brow and lips pressed tightly together, she dialed the emergency number. In that brief moment, every second felt charged with tension. The woman's heartbeat pounded audibly in her ears as she meticulously prepared to report what she believed was the clear case of a would-be criminal. When the call connected, she spoke in a measured, determined tone that betrayed no hint of the inner turmoil wrought by her prejudgments. "Hello? I'd like to report something suspicious at Elegant Jewelers on Main Street," she began, her voice steady with conviction. The dispatcher's calm, routine inquiry only intensified her certainty. "I see a young man, around 15 years old, behaving in a manner that suggests he is sizing up the merchandise," she continued. "He seems overly focused on the expensive items, as if he's planning to help himself. I believe he might be preparing to steal." Every word was laced with the assurance of someone who had long internalized stereotypes and was determined to act on them without second thought. As she provided specific details, the approximate description of his appearance, the exact location within the store, and even the suspected mode of conduct, her discretion and self-assurance grew. Each detail she recited further solidified her belief that the authorities needed to intervene immediately. She ended the call with a brief, clipped statement. "Yes, please send someone right away. I'm truly concerned." When the dispatcher acknowledged the report and assured her that officers were en route to the scene, she allowed herself a small, self-satisfied nod, convinced that she had just taken the right step to maintain order and propriety. With the call completed, she settled back into her seat in the boutique, her eyes never straying from Jaden's form. There was an almost palpable satisfaction in her gaze, a silent, unyielding certainty that she had, in that moment, safeguarded the store from potential misdeeds. Her thoughts churned with memories of past experiences, times when miscreants had indeed disrupted the sanctity of upscale establishments. In her worldview, her action was entirely justified, a solitary act of civic duty aimed at protecting the community's values. Unaware of the brewing storm outside her narrow field of vision, Jaden continued his quest for the perfect pendant. He remained oblivious to the undercurrent of suspicion that had just been set in motion. There was no hint in his thoughtful expression that he harbored any ill intent, only hope and the gentle excitement of fulfilling a long-awaited promise to his beloved mother. Each movement he made was the quiet manifestation of a determined heart, yet every subtle nuance of his behavior was being scrutinized by a predisposed observer. Almost immediately after the call, faint sounds of sirens began to echo off the building's marble floors, growing louder as they approached the boutique. The once serene atmosphere of elegant jewelers was now threaded with an air of impending disruption. Customers exchanged uneasy glances as footsteps quickened and soft murmurs of curiosity and concern began to ripple through the polished space. In a matter of minutes, what had been an ordinary evening of quiet admiration for fine jewelry was set to be transformed by the arrival of law enforcement, an arrival that would soon unveil the remarkable truth behind this deeply misunderstood encounter. Within minutes of that fateful phone call, the refined atmosphere inside elegant jewelers took a sudden, unsettling turn. The soft murmur of hushed conversations between other patrons was interrupted by the distant wail of sirens echoing off the stately facade of the boutique. As the sound crescendoed, the boutique's front entrance swung open abruptly. Two local police patrol cars pulled up discreetly outside, their red and blue lights flickering across the polished marble floor, a stark departure from the serene sophistication the store usually exuded. Inside, the tension in the air thickened perceptibly. The white woman, who had dialed emergency services with such resolute determination, settled back into her seat with a self-assured air, confident that she had done her civic duty. However, the scene that was about to unfold would soon shatter her preconceived certainties. A pair of uniformed officers, faces set in professional determination, stepped into the boutique. Their expressions were neutral but alert as they began their patrol of the elegant space. They exchanged brief nods with the store manager before moving purposefully toward the young man who had, only moments before, been absorbed in examining an exquisite pendant display. Standing near the display case, Jaden Harris appeared both composed and almost serene, his dark eyes still fixated on the medallion he had so carefully admired. As the officers approached, one of them cleared his throat, breaking the quiet with a crisp, formal greeting. "Good evening. May we see some identification, please?" he inquired, his voice firm yet devoid of any overt hostility. Jaden looked up, startled by the sudden intrusion. Yet, even with a hint of apprehension, he maintained his calm demeanor. With a soft, steady voice, he responded, "Sir, I'm just here to buy a gift for my mother. I've been saving for months." There was no trace of defiance in his words. Instead, his tone conveyed a quiet resilience, as if he had long prepared for moments exactly like this, moments where he would have to stand calmly for the sake of his intentions. The officers, nonetheless, seemed determined to execute a standard procedure without regard for the nuances of the situation. As they began questioning him about his purpose and briefly glancing over his attire and demeanor, their questions hinted at an underlying suspicion that bordered on routine profiling. Phrases like "we've had reports of pickpocketing and you seem nervous for someone making a purchase" filled the space between them. It was as if the officers, influenced by the initial anonymous call, were viewing Jaden not as a hopeful, hardworking teenager, but as a potential threat, the stereotypical image of a would-be culprit. Throughout the inquiry, Jaden's response remained measured. He politely explained, "I'm here to get a necklace for my mom's anniversary. I've saved up for it. All I need is for you to call her. I'd like her to come here and help me choose." His voice was devoid of any combative edge. Instead, it carried a quiet insistence on following the proper course of action. Yet, the officer's demeanor grew increasingly stern, and one of them began jotting down notes on a report pad, as if determined to document every minor infraction. Their approach became more invasive. One officer, trying to uphold what he believed were the strict regulations enforced in his precinct, insisted on searching Jaden's bag. Routines mandate we verify that no contraband is present. Please hand over your bag, he demanded sharply. Jaden hesitated only a moment before complying, his movements careful and respectful. All the while, a hidden smartphone, already recording the encounter, captured every detail. The measured tone of Jaden's responses, the subtle but telling tension in the officer's eyes, and the slight tremble in his hands. As the officers busied themselves with their routine checks, Jaden calmly repeated, "Please, if you have any doubts, just call my mother." His words were simple, yet they reverberated around the marble floor, an earnest plea that seemed to underscore the entire situation. The officers exchanged a glance. One of them, perhaps momentarily taken aback by Jaden's steady composure in the face of aggressive questioning, paused for a brief second, as though reconsidering the unfolding procedure. Around this time, the boutique was filled with whispers from onlookers. A few customers, watching the exchange with growing discomfort, started to murmur among themselves. The white woman who had initiated the entire ordeal watched with a mingled expression of smug satisfaction and quiet anticipation, convinced that her intervention had exposed any hidden malevolence. Yet as the minutes ticked by and Jaden's calm persisted, the first small crack in that certainty began to form. Unable to shake the steady, almost indifferent promise in the teenager's voice, one of the officers finally spoke in a slightly softer tone. "All right, we'll call your mother." His words, though still formal and detached, hinted at a flicker of doubt, perhaps a subconscious recognition that the routine by which he always judged might not fit this particular case. Through it all, Jaden's eyes never left his cherished pendant, his focus unbroken by the swirl of suspicion that now surrounded him. As another officer stepped outside to make the call, the atmosphere in the store was charged with an anticipation that hinted at something momentous lurking just around the corner. The officers continued their work, their actions recorded in real time by the smartphone that Jaden had positioned discreetly. In that moment, every detail was being documented precisely because in a few short minutes, the person whose phone number was in Jaden's wallet would answer the call. A call that would soon transform this routine check into something entirely unexpected. Little did everyone in the boutique know that the sound of ringing telephone on the officer's radio was only the precursor to a twist that would soon shatter every preconceived notion in that space. The simple request to contact his mother, an innocent plea from a boy driven solely by love and budgeted hope, was about to unveil a revelation that would force each person present to confront the true meaning of authority, prejudice, and dignity. As the officer finished his routine questioning by Jaden, a cold formality replaced the momentary flicker of doubt among the police around him. The atmosphere in the store shifted abruptly. What had begun as standard procedure now started to carry the weight and aggressive intensity of a removal protocol. Two of the uniformed officers exchanged curt glances and then moved to gently but firmly usher Jaden toward the exit. Their steps were measured and deliberate, their voices close to a monotone as they explained that he needed to step outside to complete further verification. The boutique's refined interior, moments ago a haven of careful admiration for fine jewelry, now seemed invaded by the heavy-handedness of authority. Jaden's calm eyes followed the officers as they circled him, their expressions obscured behind the veil of routine police work. He repeated in a soft but steady tone, "Please, if there is any doubt, just call my mother." His voice was almost lost amid the murmur of controlled agitation that began to ripple through the room, whispers among some clients, a few disapproving looks, and even the once satisfied sneer on the face of the white woman who had made the report. She sat with a mixture of self-importance and satisfaction, convinced now more than ever that she had done her civic duty by alerting the police to what she believed was the criminal intent of this teenager. The officers, however, were not inclined to question the authenticity of her claim. Firm words and curt gestures commenced as they attempted to physically guide Jaden toward the door. One of them said in clipped tones, "Sir, you need to come outside with us," while another added, "You're under suspicion from a report we received. We need to verify your details." Throughout this process, Jaden maintained the same inner poise. He did not push back, nor did he show any visible signs of fear or frustration. Only a quiet insistence embedded in his plea to have his mother called immediately. Outside the boutique, underneath the stark glow of a street lamp and amid the backdrop of a quiet, rain-washed evening, the officers prepared to escort Jaden to the patrol car. The tension in the air was palpable. Customers who had lingered inside could see from the large storefront windows the hushed commotion unfolding on the sidewalk. Jaden's slight, reserved obedience stark against the officers' stony expressions. At that moment, every subtle sound, from the shuffling of feet on the pavement to the distant wail of another siren, seemed imbued with an omen of change. Just as one of the officers reached for Jaden's arm, the murmur of approaching footsteps silenced even the most assertive voices. A sleek, black car, visibly expensive and exuding an aura of quiet power, slowed to a stop a few paces away from the gathering crowd. As the door swung open, every eye on the scene turned in unison, drawn by the unexpected arrival of a figure whose presence altered the unfolding tableau. Out stepped a dignified woman in a tailored, dark suit. Her posture was impeccably straight, her expression composed, and her gaze was both piercing and calm. Every movement she made was deliberate and imbued with authority. For a fraction of a second, time seemed to pause. The onlookers in the boutique and outside, the officers trying to corral a confused young man, and even the self-assured white woman who had initiated the call. All were captivated by this unexpected interloper. It was immediately apparent that she was no ordinary parent arriving to relieve her son. As she walked purposefully toward the group, the murmurs among the crowd started to swell with disbelief. Her posture, the slight tilt of her chin, and the unmistakable glint of a commanding presence in her eyes gave away her true stature. Her voice, when she finally addressed the assembled officers, was calm, measured, and carried the resonance of someone accustomed to high-stakes authority. "Officers," she said, her tone firm yet devoid of unnecessary hostility. "I am Lieutenant Denise Carter, Regional Director with the FBI. I understand there is some confusion regarding my son." A shock spread immediately through the crowd. The white woman's confident arrogance collapsed into a shocked silence as the gravity of the revelation set in. In that moment, every individual in the boutique understood that the encounter was no longer about a petty suspicion. It had transcended into something profoundly serious. The officers momentarily hesitated, visibly unnerved by the sudden appearance of Lieutenant Carter. Her credentials were unmistakable, crisp, authoritative, and unmistakably high-ranking. With barely a quiver in her voice, she continued, "I request that you immediately cease all actions against my son. He is here not for any wrongdoing, but to select a gift I now recognize as symbolizing a spirit of perseverance and love. I assure you, any actions taken against him will be met with the full weight of federal investigation." Her eyes swept over the gathering crowd, pausing briefly on the white woman, whose expression transformed from smug conviction to stunned regret. Within seconds, the tone of the situation shifted like the turning of a tide. The officers, now clearly aware that they were no longer dealing with a routine call regarding a suspicious minor, lowered their guard. Their stern voices gave way, and one by one, they began to offer apologies and reassurances. The lead officer, looking unexpectedly pale, stammered, "Ma'am, we had received a report that caused us concern. I apologize if we've caused any distress." It was evident that his confidence, bolstered by the initial misinformation, was now unraveling in the face of undeniable authority. Jaden, still standing quietly with his eyes wide but resolute, maintained an almost surreal calm. His earlier plea, "Call my mother, please," had gained a new, transformative meaning as he recognized the figure before him. His reserved expression softened with both relief and a dawning pride. as the harsh reality of the encounter began to metamorphose into a beacon of true parental protection and authority. Lieutenant Carter, with an air of unyielding dignity, addressed the assembled probationers with measured clarity. "I expect a full report on this incident," she stated crisply, "and a review of all procedures that led to this unfortunate misunderstanding. As a nation that upholds justice, it is unacceptable that a misinformed call can endanger an innocent child, and even more so, tarnish the reputation of an establishment dedicated to culture and refinement." Her authoritative tone resonated with everyone present, and as she spoke, a hush fell over the crowd. The white woman and a few other onlookers exchanged looks of mortified acknowledgement, realizing too late the error of their hasty judgment and the consequences of prejudiced assumptions. Inside, the boutique's manager stepped forward to thank Lieutenant Carter for the intervention that had reversed what was becoming a deeply embarrassing situation. The patrons, previously on edge due to the office-like operation unfolding on the sidewalk, began to whisper in admiration of the calm, resolute force that had just restored order. For Jaden, the evening's turmoil was momentarily forgotten. The shock of this sudden reversal mingled with the heartfelt relief that his true identity, and the love and dedication behind it, had triumphed over baseless suspicion. Thus, in that pivotal moment on a rain-slicked sidewalk beneath the city's streetlights, authority was redefined. What began as a baseless accusation, fueled by racial prejudice and the unchecked assumptions of one overzealous patron, had been upended by the undeniable force of true power, one not measured by outward labels or superficial judgments, but by integrity, experience, and unwavering commitment to justice. The white woman, once so convinced of the danger posed by a mere teenager, now found herself in the stark light of reality as she witnessed genuine authority in action. An authority that not only exonerated an innocent youth, but set a new standard for accountability and compassion in the face of injustice. In the aftermath of Lieutenant Carter's arrival, the boutique was awash in stunned silence. What began as an incident of routine policing, spurred by a prejudiced call, had now evolved into an event that would resonate well beyond the walls of elegant jewelers. As the officers retreated with contrite apologies and the white woman's smug satisfaction was replaced by a look of utter disbelief, the situation rapidly took on a legal dimension that no one present could have foreseen. Within hours, news of the incident broke locally. Local media outlets, initially covering the story as a minor policing controversy, soon realized the magnitude of the unfolding events. Headlines splashed across newsstands and online. Suspicious call backfires, FBI Director Mom's shocking intervention at jewelry boutique, and prejudice exposed, teen's innocence vindicated by high-ranking mother. Social media buzzed with hashtags that ranged from hashtag justice for Jaden to hashtag end racial profiling, and community forums lit up with passionate discussions about racial bias and the abuse of police authority. As the story gained traction, the regional FBI office, led by Lieutenant Denise Carter, who was, it turned out, not only a dedicated federal officer but also Jaden's mother, initiated an immediate internal review of the incident. With the pristine clarity of digital recordings captured on Jaden's hidden smartphone and additional footage available from the boutique security cameras, evidence was overwhelming. Every frame of the police interactions, every word exchanged under those rain-soaked streetlights, formed an incontrovertible record of how quickly unfounded suspicion could escalate into a public humiliation. Within days, a formal request was issued from the Pentagon for a thorough investigation into the handling of the case by the local police department. The inquiry was not merely about the mistaken arrest attempt. It was about a growing pattern of behavior. Preliminary findings revealed that similar incidents, where young, minority individuals had been unnecessarily stopped and interrogated, had been reported over the past several years, yet were dismissed without proper accountability. Lieutenant Carter's intervention had become a catalyst for change. The regional FBI made it clear that any abuse of power, especially one steeped in racial prejudice, would now be met with a full-scale, impartial investigation. A press conference was convened the following morning at a civic center near the boutique. Amid the flashing cameras and the scrutinizing eyes of the public, Lieutenant Carter, calm and resolute in her tailored suit, took the podium. Her presence radiated authority and compassion simultaneously. "Today," she began, her steady voice resonating through the hall. "I stand before you not as an adversary of law enforcement, but as a guardian of the principles that underpin our justice system. We must confront the troubling reality that appearances and preconceptions too often override the truth. My son, Jaden Harris, was here with the sole purpose of purchasing a gift, a token of love and gratitude for the years of sacrifice my family has endured. Instead, he was confronted by a system that let stereotypes overshadow facts." Her words reverberated in the silence of the room. She laid out the evidence methodically, showing snippets of video where officers questioned Jaden, overlaid with timestamps and annotations highlighting his polite responses and his repeated pleas to call her. "This footage," she emphasized, "speaks for itself. It reveals not a would-be thief, but a young man of dignity, whose only misfortune was to be misjudged because of his skin color." The press listened intently as she recounted how the anonymous citizen's call had set in motion a chain of events that threatened to tarnish an innocent life while empowering those who held prejudiced views. As the conference progressed, questions began to fly from reporters, demanding specifics about the department's past conduct and what reforms would follow this incident. Lieutenant Carter responded with measured precision. "We are initiating a comprehensive review of all procedures that allow for unchecked profiling. Today's incident will be documented as part of a larger push for accountability, where every citizen, regardless of race or background, can expect to be treated with the respect and fairness that our laws guarantee." Her remarks struck a chord with every listener. Here was a woman who had not only defied a flawed system, but had transformed her personal pain into a powerful message against systemic injustice. Simultaneously, legal proceedings were set in motion. The local jurisdiction, spurred by the public outcry and the federal inquiry, filed charges against the officers involved for misconduct and violation of civil rights. Courtrooms that were usually quiet became imbued with the tension of a dramatic reckoning. Victims and witnesses from previous similar incidents were invited to testify. Audio recordings and video evidence were presented before judges who were determined to ensure that no man, no matter how firmly he clung to his badge, could operate above the rule of law. Internally, the police department found itself at a crossroads. Longtime officers, previously shielded by a culture of silence and unquestioned authority, now faced the possibility of an overhaul in discipline. Whispers of accountability and calls for reform began to echo in the corridors of the station. The once unshakable confidence of Sergeant Jameson, whose aggressive tactics had been emblematic of the department's approach, was now met with reviews, disciplinary hearings, and the stark realization that a misinformed call could unravel years of unchecked behavior. For Jaden, the transformation in the public narrative was profound. What began as a night of humiliation and misunderstanding had turned into a watershed moment, a poignant reminder that truth, when captured and championed by those courageous enough to stand up, has the power to redefine authority. As he clutched the pendant he had so carefully selected, his eyes betrayed a mix of relief and renewed hope. He had dreamed of this moment quietly as he saved every penny, unaware of the larger change his simple act of love would ignite. With Lieutenant Carter's firm leadership and the ensuing judicial process, a clear message was broadcast far beyond the confines of the boutique, that the power of prejudice would no longer be tolerated when weighed against the truths that bind our society. In that court of public opinion, and soon in the actual halls of justice, the fabric of accountability was being rewoven, one thread at a time, ensuring that every individual's dignity, irrespective of background, was recognized and protected. In the wake of the tumultuous events at Elegant Jewelers, the nation's attention turned toward an official forum convened by the city's Civil Rights Commission. Under the bright glare of a packed press room and before a panel of lawmakers, community leaders, and media representatives, Lieutenant Denise Carter, the formidable regional director of the FBI and the mother of Jaden Harris, took the stage. Clad in a tailored navy suit that contrasted sharply with the earlier coldness of that rainy night, she exuded a quiet power and a resolve honed by years of service and sacrifice. The room fell silent, the crowd sensing that what was about to be spoken was not just a personal account, but an indictment against a system that had allowed prejudice to masquerade as protection. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice both calm and precise, "tonight is not merely about one incident involving my son. It is about the disturbing pattern of bias and injustice that has long plagued our communities. There was no dramatic theatricality, no raised fists or shrill cries, but every word she uttered carried the measured weight of truth and authority, forged over decades in environments where discipline and integrity were not negotiable. Lieutenant Carter recounted that fateful night in Elegant Jewelers with meticulous clarity. I received a call that a young man, merely 15 years of age, was acting suspiciously in our city's most upscale jewelry boutique. I never imagined that such an accusation, grounded solely in preconceived notions, could escalate into what happened next. My son, Jaden, entered that store with a singular, honest purpose: to purchase a gift that would honor the tireless love of his mother. Instead, he was subjected to an ordeal that laid bare the dark underbelly of racial prejudice in our everyday interactions. Her eyes swept over the room as she slowly paced the stage, each step deliberate, as though marking a march against an enduring injustice. She detailed how an anonymous call, fueled by bias, had triggered a chain reaction. A patron, convinced by stereotypes, flagged my son as a potential threat merely because of the color of his skin. That call set in motion an unnecessary police intervention, one that almost cost an innocent young man his dignity and left an indelible stain on our shared commitment to equality under the law. Alongside her narrative, she presented clear evidence: digital recordings from the boutique's security cameras, timestamps from Jaden's discreet smartphone, and lines of testimony that corroborated the boy's calm, measured responses amid unwarranted scrutiny. These facts, she said, were not just isolated data points. They were emblematic of a broader, systemic malaise, a failure of our institutions to separate suspicion from stereotyping. Drawing on her own experiences, Lieutenant Carter's tone became even more resolute. I have served this country in circumstances far more hostile than a misguided police stop. I have witnessed, on distant battlefields, the cost of injustice and the need for uncompromised accountability. Let it be known, a badge does not grant immunity from responsibility, nor does it excuse the abuse of power. She paused, allowing her words to sink in, her gaze steady as she met the eyes of reporters and policymakers alike. Our society must ensure that every individual, regardless of race or background, is afforded the basic dignity of respect. When the voiceless are silenced by unfounded prejudice, we all suffer. Her voice, imbued with both compassion and unwavering determination, began to outline the systemic problems that had allowed incidents like this one to proliferate. Across our nation, she explained, there are too many stories of young men and women unfairly scrutinized simply because of how they look. There are too many cases where the machinery of the law has been misdirected by bias. Today, I am calling for a thorough and transparent review of all protocols that permit such assumptions to shape our interactions with the public. We must examine how dispatch reports are handled, how officers are trained in de-escalation, and, critically, how we can integrate community oversight into every level of enforcement. This is not about casting blame on individual officers alone. It is about recognizing and rectifying a culture of systemic prejudice. Images flickered onto large screens behind her, showing side-by-side comparisons of routine stops conducted with empathy versus those marred by hostility. Her presentation illustrated how digital evidence had the power to reveal truth when institutional memory failed. What you see here, she said, indicating a split screen where Jaden's respectful demeanor contrasted with the aggressive posture of the responding officers, is the undeniable proof that unchecked bias can transform a harmless act into a travesty. It is a call to our society. No longer can we accept that assumptions based on appearance dictate the course of justice. As her passionate address continued, the audience listened intently. Several lawmakers nodded in agreement, a few even taking notes as she referenced recent studies on racial profiling, statistics of youth subjected to unwarranted stops, and the fiscal as well as the moral costs of such practices on communities of color. You must understand that each unjust incident fractures our collective trust in the institutions that govern us, Lieutenant Carter stated firmly. When one young man is wronged, it reverberates through his family, his community, and indeed our entire society. It is incumbent upon us, as custodians of justice, to rectify these wrongs, not through reactive measures that only serve to further alienate, but through proactive reforms that build bridges of understanding and accountability. Her words moved beyond mere policy recommendations. They carried the quiet force of lived experience and the sobering reality of a system in need of reform. I am here not only as a mother but as a public servant, committed to ensuring that the truth prevails above prejudice. I call upon all of you, lawmakers, law enforcement leaders, and community advocates, to join me in a concerted effort to dismantle the structures that allow such discrimination to persist. We owe it to our children, to our future, to create an environment where everyone can feel safe, valued, and treated as an equal. By the end of her address, a hush fell over the room, a pause heavy with promise and the collective understanding that this was a turning point. Lieutenant Carter's measured, factual, yet impassioned delivery had not only borne witness to a singular incident of injustice, but had also laid bare a systemic issue that demanded urgent redress. Her call for accountability resounded like a clarion call to change, sparking immediate discussions among legislators and community leaders about new policy measures and the integration of unbiased oversight in police protocols. In that moment, it became indisputably clear that true power was not derived from the superficial pride of a badge, but emerged from the strength of character, the courage to speak truth to power, and the unwavering commitment to defending the dignity of every human being. Several weeks later, after the storm of controversy had subsided into determined reform and public dialogue, life in the city began to mend its frayed edges. The incident at Elegant Jewelers had sparked not only investigations and policy reviews, but also a heartfelt conversation about equality, respect, and the power of measured authority. For many, it was a turning point, a moment when the old paradigms of prejudice were forced to yield to the quiet strength of truth and accountability. In the weeks following the press conference and the ensuing legal scrutiny, a series of changes swept through the local police department. Training sessions were revamped to emphasize de-escalation and cultural sensitivity, while community liaisons were appointed to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the diverse neighborhoods they served. The internal review, spurred by Lieutenant Denise Carter's bold intervention, uncovered disturbing patterns of racial profiling that had long been tolerated under the guise of maintaining order. As a result, several officers underwent disciplinary action, and further oversight was mandated by federal authorities. The message was clear. Unchecked authority, no matter how gleaming the badge, would no longer be shielded from accountability. Amid these sweeping reforms, a more personal chapter of the story was quietly unfolding, a chapter that would echo the resilience of the human spirit. Jaden Harris, still a thoughtful, determined teenager, had not let the ordeal diminish his hope or his innate dignity. The memory of that rain-soaked night, when he had been forced to endure suspicion and undue hardship for the sake of a simple, sincere act of love, was etched in his heart. But it was also a reminder that injustice, when confronted with truth and compassion, could be overcome. One crisp afternoon, when the sky shone with an earnest clarity and the city hummed with renewed purpose, Jaden and his mother, Lieutenant Carter, decided it was finally time to return to the place where their lives had been so unexpectedly intertwined with the forces of prejudice and reform. In a gesture that symbolized both triumph and healing, they stepped once again through the glass doors of Elegant Jewelers. The boutique, having once been the stage for humiliation and misunderstanding, now stood as a testament to change. A quiet sanctuary where the past could be acknowledged and, at last, transcended. Inside, the familiar soft glow of the display cases, the muted sparkle of precious metals, and the hushed ambience of refined conversations welcomed them. Staff and loyal patrons alike looked on with respectful nods of recognition. There was a noticeable difference in the air, not one of tension or wary glances, but of goodwill and understanding. The incident had forced the community to confront its own biases, and slowly, acceptance and empathy began to replace judgment. Jaden walked with measured steps towards the same display case where, on that fateful night, he had carefully selected the pendant. In his hand, almost as if by instinct, he clutched the small, velvet-lined box that now held the exquisite medallion he had once longed to purchase. For him, this journey was far more than the act of buying a gift. It was a reclaiming of his right to be seen as a person of dignity, not as an object of suspicion. Every step reminded him of the quiet power that comes from perseverance and the belief that every person deserves to be treated as equal. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Carter moved with the regal assurance that had come to define her. Dressed smartly and with her posture as unwavering now as it had been when she had stepped onto that rain-slicked street, she greeted both staff and patrons with warm yet firm smiles. Her presence lent the space an aura of quiet authority, one that reassured those present that true power was not found in force or preconceived notions, but in the steadfast commitment to justice and truth. In a small, discreet corner of the boutique, away from the main display and the lingering eyes of admiring customers, a familiar scene unfolded. The manager, who had long been embarrassed by the events of the past weeks, approached Jaden and his mother with respectful deference. "Welcome back," he said softly, his voice imbued with genuine contrition for what had transpired. "Thank you for giving us the chance to make this right." His words, simple and sincere, were met with a nod of acceptance from both Jaden and his mother, a quiet acknowledgement that healing and progress were indeed possible. Taking a deep breath, Jaden opened the velvet box and carefully removed the pendant, its delicate design catching the light in a mesmerizing dance of reflections. He stepped forward toward his mother, whose eyes shone with a blend of warmth, resolve, and the strength of someone who had borne the burden of advocacy and reform. With a calm yet heartfelt voice, he said, "Mom, I saved every penny for this. I wanted to give you something special for your anniversary. Not because I was forced by any expectation, but because I believe you deserve to be celebrated. This time, I buy as an equal, with pride in who I am and what we stand for." His words, imbued with a mature wisdom far beyond his years, broke through any lingering remnants of shame or regret. They were the culmination of a journey marked by adversity and redemptive love, a promise that his effort, his sacrifice, was a badge of honor in itself. A ripple of quiet applause swept through the boutique as onlookers quietly witnessed that singular moment of connection and empowerment. The pendant was gently placed around Lieutenant Carter's neck, a symbol not just of the love of a devoted son, but of a mother's unwavering dedication to justice and the battle against prejudice. The once tainted narrative of suspicion and shame was now redefined, transformed into a tale of hope, accountability, and true equality. As they embraced, the boutique's ambient light seemed to grow warmer, and every person present felt the profound shift that had taken place. That authority derived not from coercion or bias, but from the dignity with which we honor each other's humanity. In that charged silence, as the camera of a discreet onlooker captured the moment, a simple truth emerged, a truth that would soon reverberate across social media, local news, and community forums alike. They had witnessed a transformation. A white woman's hasty assumption of guilt had inadvertently sparked a chain of events that led to genuine reform. A young man's quiet determination had shattered the veneer of unfounded prejudice. And a mother, who embodied the essence of true leadership, had reminded everyone that the strength of a nation lies not in the loudness of its voice, but in the resolve to stand by what is right. With the pendant glinting softly against her chest and the subtle smile of contentment on her face, Lieutenant Carter looked directly at the assembled crowd and declared in a measured tone that resonated with finality, "Let today be a reminder. True power is not in casting judgment, but in embracing equality. We must always ensure that our actions are guided by fairness and truth, because no token, no matter how prestigious, can shield us from accountability." As the scene slowly faded into a moment of serene contentment, one final message lingered in the hearts of all who had borne witness. They saw only a boy. She saw suspicion. But when his mother arrived, the entire store witnessed true authority. Subscribe to see more stories where truth always comes in time, and strength is measured not by the loudness of one's voice, but by the resilience in the face of injustice.